Hello, Northlanders. It's Dan Williamson. This past week, the Superior Telegram released its 31st episode of Archive Dive, which is a monthly history podcast where we dive into the archives of historic events, people, and places in Superior and Douglas County. If you haven't checked out Archive Dive yet, I highly encourage you to do so. You can find episodes at superiortelegram.com or wherever you listen to this podcast. In this month's episode, we explore the story of the World War II veteran for whom the Blatnik Bridge was named for. Thousands of motorists cross the bridge daily, yet many may not know about the man himself. As a Minnesota congressman, Chisholm native John Blatnik was instrumental in getting the bridge between Duluth and Superior built. As a captain and paratrooper with the U.S. Army Air Force, Blatnik spent 8 months behind enemy lines in Yugoslavia. The work included setting up an escape system for downed American airmen. One of them was a Duluth man, Swante Norlund. For this episode, Telegram reporter Maria Lockwood is joined by Brianna Fiance, curator of collections and exhibits for the Richard I. Vaughn Veterans Historical Center in Superior, as they discuss the life of Blatnik. Here's a clip.
And nobody knew he had done this, huh?
I mean, I'm sure people knew, but it wasn't, at least for us, it wasn't in the common conscience. I've never read a book that included anything about his service. He did an oral history for the Minnesota Historical Society, but he only mentioned his service in a couple brief sentences and then moved on. It was largely because it was classified materials that he couldn't talk about it for a long time.
And did he ever say how many airmen he helped?
380. So
380?
His team, but they're small teams. But yeah, his team was responsible for getting 380 downed airmen out.
Again, you can find that episode at superiortelegram.com or wherever you also get this podcast. I'll also put a link in the show notes. In case you missed last month's episode, I'm resharing it here. In July, Maria and local historian and retired librarian Teddie Meronek discuss the history of the University of Wisconsin-Superior, and they tell the story about an astro-nut who helped raise money for a Superior hospital. I encourage you to take a listen, and when you're done, click the link in our show notes to find more episodes of Archive Dive.
Hello, and welcome to Archive Dive. I'm Maria Lockwood, a reporter with the Superior Telegram. Each month, we dip into files on historic events, people, and places in Superior and Douglas County with local historians. Today, we'll trace the history of the University of Wisconsin-Superior campus and learn about an astro-nut who helped raise money for a Superior hospital. The community's determination to bring a normal school to Superior was rewarded when the school opened in 1895. Built in the latest design, it featured adjustable desks and a system that sucked away chalk dust from the blackboards. Destroyed by a fire in 1914, the building was rebuilt and has continued to anchor the campus. In 1962, one of the students at the college spent nearly 100 hours in a space capsule on top of a 40-foot pole to raise money for the Memorial Hospital Fund. Dressed in a spacesuit and connected to the Earth by a telephone, this astro-nut spent his days eating food delivered by A&W and chefs and taking calls from local school children. Helping us dive into the story today is local historian Teddie Meronek. Teddie, thanks for joining us.
I'm glad to be here, Maria.
Excellent. So, UWS has quite the history.
It does. And if I'm not mistaken, we are both graduates of UWS.
Yes, we are.
It's a wonderful school. Yeah, it had kind of a shaky start because the people in the rest of Wisconsin didn't know if we really deserved a normal school here in Superior.
Just too far up north.
No, that was one of the problems. My favorite story about it is that there was competition with Ashland because they also wanted a normal school. Mm-hmm. And there were several other communities, and apparently they just doled these normal schools out, you know. They had rigorous regulations about who could get it and who couldn't. Okay. But Ashland said that Superior was not deserving of a normal school because we just did not have enough culture here in Superior.
Really?
We were not cultured. And I thought, we had an opera house. We had a library that should count for it. Well, the Superior Telegram had to get their digs in at Ashland, and they said something about, maybe Ashland shouldn't be speaking this way about culture, because often we hear Ashland, Hurley, and hell in the same sentence.
The editorializing.
I know. But Superior finally got it. They had to do a lot of campaigning, and they had to make those people believe that we were worthy of a school up here. And so the regents, the board that really directs the university system in Wisconsin, all the regents came up here by boat, and they got tours of the city, and they were convinced by people, yes, this is the place that you need a school. But they also needed an actual place to put the school, and that was harder to come by because the regents wanted the school near the center of the town, which they wanted it on Belknap and Tower someplace.
Really?
Yeah. And I think about that. I think that would be kind of strange to have the university there, but maybe I'm just used to where it is. The other place that they were fond of was Hayes Court. Before it was Hayes Court, but it was owned by Hiram Hayes. And they thought that might be a good place for the school. But then the Land and River Improvement Company came through with a donation of 7 acres of land where the university sits right now, and the regents were willing to accept that. So then they had to build a school. And I had been watching this program on the Minnesota Public TV network, and it was talking about architects in Minnesota, and I was very interested in that. And one of the architects was named Henry Wild Jones, and I just thought, I like his name, Henry Wild Jones. When I was going through my notes again for the university, I realized that he had been the architect who'd built the first normal school on the property where Old Main sits right now. And if you're interested in architecture, you should look him up because he has done just some fabulous things in the Twin Cities area. And to think that he designed that school, and it was almost like a Victorian wedding cake. If you see pictures of the old school, it was just a wonderful place. It had about 30 or 40 rooms. It had a gymnasium because what people don't understand is when the school was first built, that was it.
One building.
One building. And everything. What they were doing was they were educating people to teach, mostly in rural schools. They offered a 2-year degree, and you could teach. It depended on what level you came in the school at. If you had been a high school graduate, you'd only have to spend those 2 years. But if you were 16 years old and hadn't graduated from high school, you could still come, but you'd have to stay 4 years. And tuition was free.
Really?
You had to pay for books. And you had to find a place to live because there was no place to live on campus at that time.
They didn't have dormitories at that point?
No, and they had a gymnasium in the school, a very nice one, and they had a swimming pool too.
Really?
Yes.
All in the one building?
Yes, all in the one building. And they built 2 extensions on the building because obviously their student population was growing, so they needed more room. But they were a teacher's college. Well, they weren't called a college at that time, a teacher's school. They were teaching people how to teach, so they had a manual training school there too, actual classrooms where these people would practice the skills they learned to be a teacher. But in 1914, there was a huge fire. It was an electrical fire in one of the new additions that they had added to the building, and it burnt the building to the ground. To the absolute ground. There was, if you had anything in that building, it was gone. So teachers lost their notes, people just lost everything, and they didn't know what they were going to do after that. But the regents were, because Superior was successful, and Superior was running the first courses to teach kindergarten teachers. They were the first place in the state that did that.
Because the first kindergarten was down in Watertown, right? The first Wisconsin kindergarten.
Yeah, but they were teaching teachers how to teach in kindergartens, and it was a program that was recognized across the United States. Caroline Barber was the woman who headed this program, and it was a coup for Superior that they were doing so well in this. So the regents were very determined to rebuild this school, and they did it in a year.
A year?
A year. The class of 14, when they graduated, they had to get their diplomas at the Hammond Avenue Presbyterian Church because there was no place left. So for that year, when they were building the school, they sort of parceled out the students to different places. And
so classes continued.
Classes continued without fail. And they went to Central High School. They sort of varied the hours when the high school students were there, and then the college kids would come afterwards.
Okay.
And then they had by that time built a dorm on campus in 1910, Crownheart Hall. The old Crownheart Hall was built.
Okay.
So classes were held there. And there were classes held at Blaine School. So they had them all over the place, but everybody got educated, everybody graduated, and then the school was rebuilt. I think they paid, I think it was between $200,000 and $300,000 for this new building, where the first one had been $60,000 or $80,000. But it was huge, and they spent a lot of money on it. And then the campus just started growing from then, because in 1917 they built the place we all now know as Erlinson Hall. Mm-hmm. And that's where the manual training school was, where they taught people how to teach.
Okay.
So
what was Old Main used for then?
It was all the other classes that you would need. And then eventually they built a gym.
Okay.
But that was it until really in the dormitory. There wasn't a men's dormitory until I think it was in the 50s.
Really? Because generally speaking, more women went to college
right.
than men back then, right?
Very many more, yeah. And they figured the guys could go out and find some place to live in town.
Okay.
Well, the students who first came there, that's what they had to do too, was find a place in town and pay rent to live at someplace and, get their meals, because there was no place on campus to live.
Right.
So.
When did education stop being free?
I think the normal school was that was the mode of education or the form of education. I don't know exactly when they started charging, but by 1926, the normal school was done with, that kind of education, and they went to a 4-year degree.
And they changed their name.
Then they were Wisconsin State Teachers College.
Okay. And once again, they taught teachers.
They taught teachers, and it was a while until in the 1920s, they started educating high school teachers. So you had to have a faculty that could not only teach you how to teach, but to teach you an expertise in these subjects that you were going to be teaching. So they went to the bachelor's degree, and then later on they awarded liberal arts degrees where you didn't have to be a teacher, you could just get a degree.
Right.
But that was their main course in the beginning, was they were there to educate people to be teachers.
Right. Did that change with the name when they became University of Wisconsin Superior?
I can't remember when the liberal arts degree started, but first they were Wisconsin State Teachers College, then they became Wisconsin State College, then they became Wisconsin State University.
Okay.
And then they became UWS. There were lots of changes in there. And the 1950s and the 1960s were when the campus really started to build up. Of course, they are preparing for the baby boomers. Or they built Barstow Hall, they built a student union, they built Gates Gym, and then later on they would build Holden Fine Arts and all of those things, and a lot of dormitories for both men and women, which in the beginning they were only housing the women in Crownheart Hall, which I think is probably one of my, I wish it still stood. It was one of the most beautiful buildings on campus. Mm-hmm. And I think they could house 78 girls there.
Okay.
They had maids. In the beginning, They had maids. They had 7 maids in the beginning, yeah.
Okay.
And I think they had a nurse also.
Right.
For the girls.
That makes sense. And wasn't there one year they had so many students, they ended up having the girls had to stay at the Hotel Superior?
They stayed at the Hotel Superior, and the boys stayed at what was the Tower House then, but we know as the Android. So they stayed there for a couple of years.
Because they had way too many students?
Yeah, they had way too many students. The baby boomers they were coming in, and they had no place to put them. When they closed, or when they stopped using Crownheart as a girls' dorm, they converted it to a boys' dorm for a few years until they had built some men's dorms.
Wonderful. So as the campus changed and brought in, bringing in a new liberal arts education and things, how did the community respond?
I think when you look back at the old newspapers, it was like every year that, the new school term started, it was a big welcome to these people. I can't imagine why they wouldn't, because these people were adding so much to the local economy. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I feel like it's an island and it's separate from Superior. I hope that they seem to be building that community spirit more now.
Because it is it's in the heart of Superior.
I know, it really is, but apparently not in the real heart of Superior, according to the old regents. But, I try to think when I was on campus, I don't know, you are sort of isolated in a way.
I never felt that. 'Cause
You never felt that?
Well, I was a non-traditional student who I had 4 children at home. and I
yeah.
was
So,
going to
yeah.
school, so I would walk to the campus and do classes, and I'd go home.
Yeah. Personally, I thought it was a wonderful experience. I had amazing professors, and I got a fine education that prepared me for what I did for the rest of my life. So it's a great school. And I love its history because there's so many quirky people who have either gone there or worked there. My favorite is Thorpe Langley.
Thorpe Langley, who has an auditorium named
after him.
Tell me about Thorpe Langley.
He not only graduated from the school, but he taught there.
What did he teach?
This is funny, he taught geography, but I think what Thorpe is mostly remembered for is he was really into community theater, and he also acted in things that were done at the school, and he produced things and directed things. In fact, he directed this one vaudeville show, and one of the groups that Thorpe had directed won first place in this vaudeville contest in 1926. And so because of that, they were eligible to go down and compete in a statewide event. Well, they weren't allowed, the regents would not allow them to go down there because they thought that Superior's vaudeville show was a little bit risque, especially because the event would be held in River Falls, and they just thought it was a little too risque.
Just not up to their standards?
And Thorpe was the one who had directed it.
Okay. So when did he graduate?
Oh, he graduated before World War I because he did fight in World War I. He was called up in both wars. He fought in World War I and World War II.
Wow.
And he actually won I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, the Croix de Guerre, it's a French medal that he was awarded, along with Henry Blumberg, who was another graduate from the normal school, who was awarded that by the French government. So
right. Now, Henry did not make it back, though.
Henry didn't make it back, but Thorpe did. And as I said, he came back and then he taught geography. I love the whole geography and theater person in one.
It's not your traditional combination.
No. The other interesting thing about the school in the 1920s is that I just found this out, that Martin Pattison had died and Grace Pattison was going to leave town, and she left the house, Fairlawn, to the children's home in Superior. But she offered the conservatory, the greenhouse that they had on the side of the Pattison home, to the normal school.
Oh.
And Martin Pattison had bought that conservatory from the Chicago World's Fair, the 1893 Chicago World's Fair with the Tiffany window. And she offered it to the school, but the regents wouldn't let the college take it.
Why?
They don't have to give a reason.
I suppose.
But I suppose they just thought it was probably too big of an expense or whatever.
Well, they have a greenhouse now.
Yeah. But I thought that would be nice because they lost the World's Fair window in the fire, because after it had been taken out of the Wisconsin building, it was put in the normal school right opposite the entrance of the building, and that burnt in the fire. And I thought, well, then they would have had this that came from the Chicago World's Fair. But I don't know what ever happened to the conservatory, if it was sold to someone else or, yeah.
I have to look into that.
Yes.
There was a very interesting student in the 1960s also who spent some time in a space capsule.
Yes, it was the space race, 1962. John Glenn had just been the first man to circle the Earth in a spaceship. So at that time, Superior was building a new hospital, Superior Memorial Hospital.
Is that where St. Mary's of Placentia is now?
Yeah, and it was funded by private funds. I mean, the whole hospital was paid for by money that they had raised, the community had raised.
That's an interesting Superior phenomenon, isn't it?
I know.
The Android Hotel was built with people helping.
Yeah, and Memorial was too.
Interesting.
And so the college thought they would get in on this. One of the fraternities decided that one of their fraternity brothers would sit atop a 40-foot pole in what kind of looked like a space capsule, and people could come by and donate money that would go to the hospital fund.
Oh.
And he sat up there for, I think it was 98 hours or something, and eating his food that had been delivered.
98 hours, not 98 days.
Yeah, 98 hours.
98 hours, okay.
Yeah. And people would drop in their nickels, dimes, and quarters, and they raised over $1,000. I think it might have been $1,800 even.
Wow.
And he had a phone.
Mm-hmm.
So the school,
not a cell phone.
Not a cell phone, a regular line phone, landline. Yep. And the kids from the schools would call him and ask him questions like, "Was he really an astronaut?" But he got a threat from Duluth.
A threat?
Yes, they said they were going to come over and knock him off his post,
No.
but they didn't. Yeah.
And he wasn't worried, though, because he had folks guarding around.
Right. They
the
were
bottom
guarding
of it.
him 24 hours a day. But the winds were the thing that probably scared him the most because I can't imagine being up there.
So is this a pole that was already there?
I don't know if they, in the one photo I've seen, it kind of looks like a telephone pole to me.
Were there telephone poles downtown at that
I don't know.
time?
It was supposed to be on the corner of Belknap and Tower, where the library is right now. So I don't know.
Because I wondered if they just dug a hole and
put it
in, or if there was one already there.
I think I'd trust the phone company's pole more than something that my fraternity brothers had put up for me.
Definitely.
But there's really not a lot in the school paper. Have you ever been online and looked at the old Peptimus and the Promethean?
Yes, through the Jim Danhill Library website, you can do that, and you can look at the really old issues of the Peptimus, is what it was called initially, right?
And it's such a valuable tool. And it's fun to look at the years that you were in college there and read what was going on. But they really didn't write a lot about him in the newspaper. I was kind of surprised. And the other thing I was surprised about is that there was another fraternity that got together and raised the funds to put up a memorial to the 3 men who died when they were building the Blatnik Bridge.
Really?
And they raised the funds and they had the memorial created, and it's supposed to be on the Minnesota side. And I was wondering about that. Of course, I'm thinking, well, they were Wisconsin students. Why did they do that? But the 3 men who died on the bridge, 2 of them were from 2 harbors and 1 was from Duluth. So I understand why you would want to put that over on that side of the bridge.
Right, that makes sense.
But they took it upon themselves and did that.
Did they know the men?
I don't think so. I think it's just something their fraternity wanted to do.
Oh, that's lovely. Is the memorial still up?
I don't know. I don't know if you could get to it now with all the construction that's going on over there.
Right.
Yeah.
Was it on one of the pillars over there?
No, it was actually on the ground from the picture. I've only seen one picture of it.
Okay.
So if anybody knows about it, they should let us know if it's still there or not.
I didn't even realize that had happened, that they had them.
And then at the library, the Superior Public Library has the Carl Gaboy murals, and one of them is of the bridge. It's of the men on the bridge working without any of their safety equipment. I love that picture. I just think that was a great way for Carl to show, how that bridge was built.
Right.
And it's sad that they lost 3 men, but I'm surprised that more didn't. If you fell off that, you were dead.
Yes, definitely. How many people do they have working on it? Any idea?
I don't remember.
They probably didn't put any estimates in the paper, maybe.
Yeah. But, if you're wearing a tool belt, as the one man was who fell off, you hit the water and you're down there. I mean, they aren't going to be able to get you. So it was a dangerous job. I'm glad the safety equipment has improved.
Very much.
Of course, I would never want a career in having to walk over, a bridge that was being built. But
no.
Yeah.
Were there any other interesting students from UWS that you've...
Oh, interesting students that I've met along the way. Oh, I'm trying...
That you've met or that you've researched about. I know Henry Blomberg is someone who's close to your heart.
Oh, yeah.
And...
Edith Carlson, who was going to build the Frank Lloyd Wright House. She was also a normal school graduate. Gordon McQuarrie. She was a
librarian, so did she train as a teacher?
She went to school for 2 years and got her degree at the normal school. Then she went to the University of Wisconsin. She taught, and then she went to the University of Wisconsin to get her bachelor's degree, which she got in botany, I believe. And then she went to library school after that.
And then she came back and she worked for the Superior
Public Library. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And she decided she was going to have a Frank Lloyd Wright house.
Right.
And
that didn't work out too well.
Many letters ensued.
Yes, as they do when you're building anything. But Gordon McQuarrie, too. He spent 2 years at the normal school and then went to the University of Wisconsin and got his bachelor's degree.
Okay. And Gordon McQuarrie, if people don't know, is a famous outdoor writer.
Outdoor writer, editor of the Telegram at one time, too. J.W. Beecroft.
He went to UWS?
Yeah, our bookstore was named after Mr. Beecroft. Yeah, he went to UWS. There's lots of interesting people. Dick Bong, of course.
Yes, he did.
And he trained there. I mean, that was part of their education during World War II, is they trained people and they went out to the airport here and got pilot training. So that's where Dick got his initial pilot training, was at the university here.
Okay. So he wasn't training to be a teacher, but they did train him.
Well, by the time he was there, you could get a bachelor's degree. So I don't know what Dick's intentions were. He probably just went there for the training, too. Yeah.
Wow. A lot of famous faces have gone through there.
It is amazing when you think about it for such a small school, especially in the early years. And then, Tuffy Lemons, who's a football Hall of Famer,
Mhm.
he convinced the New York Giants to come here for a couple of summers to practice.
When was
Before the
that?
season started, it was in the late 40s, early 50s, sometime in there,
Okay.
because it was too warm. There was no air conditioning in those days in anything, and it was too warm anyplace else. But in Superior, you could always pretty much count on it was going to be a lot cooler than it was anyplace else.
Right.
And then I heard Newt Rockne one time came and did a coaching camp at the school.
UWS?
Yeah.
Right, because they did have a football team
Yeah.
for many years.
Oh, yeah. Mertz, there's somebody. Mertz who influenced Mertz
Did he go
Mortarelli.
to school at UWS?
He did, and he influenced so many generations of people. Talk about Mertz nowadays, and somebody's going to have something good to say about him. I like Mertz because his philosophy was no grades, no play.
Oh, okay. So he was a teacher and he was
He
a
was a
coach.
teacher, yeah.
What did he teach?
I don't remember what Mertz, he had a lot of degrees, I think. He had a lot of interests. Can't remember what he taught.
But he was an athlete himself, and then he was
He was a wrestler.
Right.
Yeah, that was his favorite, was wrestling and coaching wrestling. So, yeah, there's lots of Deb Krieg. If you ever get a chance to read Deb Krieg's article that she wrote about Mertz after he died, he was an influence on her life too, and that's a very moving article. And you understand why Mertz is respected still to this day the way he was, and even has the street behind. It used to be behind the old football stadium named Mortarelli Drive there.
Yep, it's still
Yeah,
excellent.
I know all these people.
So it's a good thing that Superior got this university,
Yes.
this normal school, when it did, because it has certainly done a lot for the community and for the people who went there.
And we were, at that time, when they were contemplating where to put that normal school, we were in Superior, the second largest city in Wisconsin, which is always hard for me to believe. Milwaukee was the largest, but apparently nobody else had caught up to us. By 1910, we were about 40,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
So we were a big community. But what they were worried about when they put the school here was we were going to get more students from Minnesota than we were from Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't want to be educating Minnesota people. And the other thing was we were so far away from anything. That's what they said. It was like so far from the rest of Wisconsin. No, the rest of Wisconsin is far from us, but we're not far from them.
Right.
It works both ways, I guess. I don't know, but they were really concerned about that. But I think it's better to give these people in these outlying regions an opportunity to be educated than to have all the schools just placed in one section of the state.
Right. And it's great that UWS continues to stay strong and educate next generation's leaders.
Yes, and keeps building its campus. And
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Teddie, and thank you for listening to Archive Dive. New episodes are available monthly at superiortelegram.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, email me at mlockwood@superiortelegram.com.